This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in the merit of a Refuah Sheleimah, of a complete and speedy recovery for Gila Miriam bat Chaya. She is the daughter of a dear friend of ours who was recently diagnosed with a very serious and very late stage cancer. May she merit a full and speedy recovery with no lingering effects. It's the first Parsha Podcast of 2025. It's so exciting. Let's celebrate. And let us all hope and pray that we will merit to record a new episode each week in 2025. With the help of the Almighty, we haven't missed a week since August of 2020. Unbelievable, 4.5 years. And the trick is to do it 1 week at a time. And yes, let's be honest, not every single episode was a banger, but it's still a remarkable achievement. Even if a podcast is not setting the world on fire, it's not submitted to the Torch Podcast Hall of Fame, I think it's still something to be proud of. And we hope and pray that we'll have the great merit and fortune to record a new Parsha Podcast each week in this upcoming year. Now, before we start, I have a question I need to pose to y'all, to the audience. I take great pride in having no advertisement on the podcast. I don't want this to be transactional. Hey, you give me your time, you give me your attention, and I'll use part of it to try to sell you, I don't know, timeshares, mattresses, some investment advice to buy gold. I don't want that, where it's partially Torah and partially some commercial use. So we chose a different system. Everything is free, everything without a paywall, no ads. And once a year, we have a fundraiser. And we try to raise the bulk of our annual expenses for the Torch Center here in Houston, Texas during that fundraiser. And the rest of the time, 100% of the effort can be towards our mission. Now, of course, we have dedications from time to time, and we have, of course, our partners. We don't call them donors. Partners who support us year round. But we've resisted doing any advertising. And we get inquiries from time to time. And recently, a dear friend, he wanted to do not just advertising, a whole campaign. And it was sort of almost native content to the kind of stuff that we do. So he asked, well, would you guys consider doing that? I said, you know what? I'm going to speak to my colleagues at the Torch Center, which I did yesterday. And the colleagues said, well, why don't you ask the listeners? What do they think? They understand that we need to pay the bills. We need to pay the rabbis. We need to keep the Torch Center humming. And we're always looking for more funding. But of course, the podcasts, they are sacrosanct. We don't want to mingle learning and growing in Torah with ads. So my vote is to keep it the way it is. We'll do our fundraiser March time, and that's it. But I told my colleagues, this is, I'm the dictator of the podcast. It's an autocracy, but I'm a benevolent dictator. And I'm sympathetic to the will of the people. So what do you think? Should we interrupt it with intrusive ads? Pre-roll, mid-roll? I'll start selling? Or should I keep it the way it is? Let me know. rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. It's Parshas Vayechi. It's the last installment in the book of Genesis. And I pledged to record the Parsha Podcast live on Zoom, on torchzoom.com, Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. for the duration of Genesis. And I said, we'll see how it goes and we'll continue if we like it. And I kind of like it. I enjoy it. I like to have a deadline. I like to have the audience. So please, we will continue with the help of the Almighty, the Parsha Podcast live on Torch Zoom, Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central. We'll do one minor tweak. I like to have some chit chat, but I realized that before the podcast, I'm a poor conversationalist. I'm a little antsy to record. And I'm a way better conversationalist after the recording is over. So we'll open the Zoom from now on at 7:55 p.m. So we can have 5 minutes of settling down. We'll start at 8, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end if someone is thus inclined for all sorts of questions and chit-chat afterwards. I like it. I enjoy it. I appreciate y'all joining me on towards Zoom.com. Tuesday evenings at 8, and we'll continue it, please God, in the book of Exodus. It's Parshas Vayechi. Jacob and his family are secure in Egypt. They've been living there for 17 years now. And Jacob is getting old, and he's going to pass soon. And he secures a promise from Joseph: don't bury me in Egypt. He does not want to be buried in Egypt. Rashi tells us 3 reasons. He knows prophetically that the dust, the earth of Egypt will be crawling with lice. He doesn't want to be munched upon by the lice. Reason number 1. Reason number 2, he knows that in the future there will be resurrection of the dead, and all those who will have the great fortune and merit to be resurrected will be resurrected in the land of Israel. And those who are meritorious and worthy and righteous enough to be resurrected, but they are buried outside of the land, they'll have to roll. They'll have to tumble through the tunnels until they arrive in the land of Israel. And that's bumpy. That's unpleasant. The tunnels are not paved. Jacob does not want the experience of tumbling through the tunnels. Bury me in Israel. Reason number 3, he doesn't want to be deified. When Jacob came, the famine paused. Whenever Jacob got close to the Nile, the waters of the Nile elevated themselves towards him. Jacob was a celebrity. He was a superstar. And if he was buried in Egypt, there's a risk of him being deified. For these 3 reasons, he tells Joseph, don't bury me here. Instead, bring me to the land of Canaan. Bring me back home. Inter me in the cave of the patriarchs. 7 people are already interred there. Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and his wife Leah. There's one more slot. Jacob wants it for himself. Joseph agrees. Joseph swears to this effect. And Jacob bows in appreciation. Jacob gets sick. Joseph comes with Ephraim and Menashe, his 2 eldest sons. And Jacob blesses them in a series of blessings. He elevates Ephraim and Menashe. He makes them tribal leaders on their own. Ephraim and Menashe are like Reuven and Shimon. And all future sons born to Joseph are included not in the tribe of Joseph. That's been bifurcated into either the tribe of Ephraim or Menashe. Joseph ended up with a double portion. He was like a firstborn. He had not only 1 tribe, he had 2 tribes. And then Jacob blesses Ephraim and Menashe, and he crisscrosses his hands. And Joseph tries to correct him. No, you got it wrong. The right hand should be a Menashe. He's the firstborn after all. Says, no, I got it right. The right hand belongs on Ephraim. Then we have chapter 49, one of the most poetic and richly layered portions of the Torah. Jacob calls his sons, gather, I will tell you what will happen to you in the end of days. And he has to make an adjustment. Initially, Jacob had planned on revealing to his sons what will happen to them in the end of days. He was going to reveal to them the end game of it all. But that relied on prophecy. And the prophecy conked out on him. And he pivoted. And he gave them a blessing instead. Jacob waited to his deathbed to bless his sons. Moshe, at the end of the Torah, did the same. He blessed the nation on the day of his death. And Jacob went through his sons one at a time. And he gives them these very flowery, very poetic blessings. And each verse has multiple nuanced messages and meanings. And the commentaries try to decipher the subtleties of Jacob's blessings. After he concludes the blessings, he was gathered to his people. Jacob died. Or at least it appears that he died. The Talmud says, well, he actually didn't die. Different story. And Jacob was mourned, and he was embalmed, and he spent 70 days in Egypt. Joseph comes to Pharaoh and says, I promised my father to bury him in the land of Canaan. And Pharaoh agreed to have Joseph take Jacob to the land of Canaan due to the oath that he swore to his father. Rashi tells us that there's another oath. Joseph swore an oath to Pharaoh to not reveal, to not divulge the secret that Joseph knew. The rules in Egypt said that a monarch, a king, has to know all the world's languages. And when Joseph was a candidate to be the viceroy of Egypt, he had to know all the languages. And the Talmud tells us that an angel came and taught Joseph all the languages. And when he was inspected, language after language, he speaks them all. And then Joseph says, well, you missed one. What about Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue? What about Hebrew? And Pharaoh says, what? I'm not familiar with that one. Joseph says, don't worry, that'll be our little secret. I swear I won't reveal to anyone that you are ignorant in Hebrew. Pharaoh says, I'm not going to ask Joseph to violate the oath he gave to his father, because if he violates that oath, eventually he may be compelled to violate the other oath, the oath that he swore to me, that he won't reveal my ignorance in Hebrew. With permission secured, Joseph and his brothers carry the bier, the funeral procession of Jacob, and there is an extended eulogy, and the parsha ends, and the book ends in the aftermath of Jacob's death. The brothers were worried that Joseph may get his revenge now. He calms them, he reassures them, and the parsha ends, and the book ends with the death of Joseph and his prophecy, foretelling the redemption from Egypt, which we will learn about, please God, in the book of Exodus. Now, I have to tell you about a miracle that happened to me this week. As you perhaps know, ever since Parshas Noach, I've been sending out a newsletter on Fridays to anyone on my email list who hasn't yet unsubscribed. And usually I'm scrambling. People write to me, send it on Thursday. Why don't you send it so late? I'm in the UK. I'm in Israel. I don't get it till after Shabbos. As you don't understand, it's not like I have it printed and all ready to go. I'm working Friday morning to finish it. So this week I said, you know what? I'm going to try something radical. I'm going to work on the newsletter on Monday. Get a head start. So yesterday, Monday, I sat down. I started working. Amazing. Thank you, Hashem. I wrote 3,000 words in one sitting. I basically rewrote a whole piece and I'm adding new stuff. Amazing. I think it'll be a hit. It's still only a first draft. But then today, Tuesday morning, I wake up and I'm like, oh no, I got a Parsha Podcast tonight. TowardsZoom.com. Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central. It's time to scramble. So I go to the academy, to the Beis Medrash, to the Kollel here in Houston. And I'm trying to work on it. And a friend shows up. And he's like, I got a question on the Parsha. And he asked me a tough question on the Parsha. And it gets me thinking. And it starts to churn the gears. And it helps develop an idea. So I want to tell you just a miracle that the Almighty bailed me out again. We have a Parsha Podcast. Quite improbably. Jacob is about to die. And he meets Joseph, bury me not in the land of Egypt, in the land of Canaan. He is getting sick, and Joseph comes and visits with his two sons this time. And he gets blessings, several blessings. Ephraim and Menashe, they're like Reuven and Shimon. And if you study the blessings that Jacob gave to the sons of Joseph, he actually blesses them twice. Actually, he does more than two blessings. There's two blessings, and there's one assignment that he gives where he elevates them to the status of Reuven and Shimon. In one of them, if you look very carefully, you'll see that the first blessing that he gives is a blessing really to Joseph. The verse says very clearly, Vayevarech es Yosef, he blesses Joseph. And he kind of gives Joseph a blessing by blessing the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Menashe. So what's the first blessing? Vayevarech es Yosef, he blesses Joseph. And he says, the God that my forefathers Abraham and Isaac walked before. This God who was my shepherd from when I was little until today. And this angel who redeems me from all evil. This force, the angel, should bless the lads, Ephraim and Menashe. V'yikareh bahem shemi, and let my name be assigned upon them. And the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, v'yidgu larov b'kerev haaretz, and let them proliferate and multiply in the midst of the land. Now, just as an aside, this is a very special verse for our family. It's a very special verse because it's part of the nighttime Shema. When you say Shema at night, we say Shema at least twice a day. When you say Shema at night, you add this verse as well. But it's a very special verse for our family. Because if you look at the last 5 words of this verse in Hebrew, so it's V'yitzchak and Isaac, V'yidgu larov, and let them proliferate and multiply, b'kerev haaretz, in the midst of the land. And if you take those 5 words and take the first letter of those 5 words, you'll spell out my last name, Walby. In Hebrew, it's Volbe, Vav, Vav, Lamed, Beis, Hey, and it's the first letter of these 5 successive words. This is the place where our name is hinted to in the Torah. Now, my father, he shall live and be well, he says, well, the verse refers to me, because it says the word that comes before V'yitzchak v'yidgu larov b'kerev haaretz, it's the word Avraham, Abraham, and my father's name is Abraham. It's Avraham. So the verse refers to me. It says Avraham, and then it says Vav, Vav, Lamed, Beis, Avraham Volba, Abraham Wolby. It's about me. So I said, no. You have to go even earlier. What does Jacob say? V'shem avosai, and the name of my father is Avraham, and then it says Wolby. So it's referring to me. So this is the verse in the Torah that it speaks about me. So we got to study this verse very carefully because this is a special verse here for the Parsha Podcast. So this is some of the blessings that Jacob is giving to his grandson. This is like the first blessing that he gives them. And then there's a second blessing. Jacob places his hands upon the 2 grandsons, and Joseph had positioned them that the right hand, which is the dominant hand, should be upon the head of the older one, which is Menashe. So Joseph takes Menashe in his left side, because he's facing Jacob. So his left is Jacob's right. And he places Menashe right there so that it's nice and easy for Jacob to place his right hand upon Menashe's head. And Ephraim was the younger. Well, he's on Joseph's right side, and he's on Jacob's left side. But of course, Jacob crisscrosses his hand. And that causes a minor kerfuffle. Joseph sees this, and he was disturbed by that. He says, no, you got it wrong. Menashe, he's the older one. Place your right hand upon his head. And Jacob says, no, I didn't get it wrong. I know very clearly who is the older one and who's the younger one. But because Ephraim is going to be greater, Achiv hakatani gedal mimeno, the younger brother, will supersede the older one, and his descendants, his progeny, will be Melo Hadroim, will fill all the nations. That's why he's deserving of having the dominant hand. So that's the minor kerfuffle. And then we have verse 20. Vayvarchem, Jacob persists and blesses them again. Vayvarchem yomahu, and he blessed them on that day. What is this second blessing that Jacob gives his grandsons? Lamer, to say, Becha Yevarech Yisrael. In you will Israel bless. Lamer, and they will say, Yesimcha Elokim, may God make you, may God render you like Ephraim and Menashe. This is the second blessing that Jacob gives his grandsons. Becha Yivarech Yisrael. Through you, all of Israel will give a blessing. What does that mean? So Rashi tells us, if someone wants to give their sons a blessing, this is the blessing that they give. The blessing of Ephraim and Menashe is that everyone else will bless their own sons to be like Ephraim and Menashe. V'yomer ish lebno, and a man will say to his son, Yisimcha Elokim, and God made you like Ephraim and Menashe. It is a universal custom, the day before Yom Kippur Eve, to bless your children, and all of your sons you bless them, by placing your hands on their head and saying the words, Yisimcha Elokim k'Ephraim v'Menashe. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. Why do we do that? Because of this verse, 49:20. Jacob blesses Ephraim and Menashe, that everyone will bless their children to be like Ephraim and Menashe. These are the children that we hope our children become like. So it's a universal custom to bless our children on Yom Kippur Eve with this blessing. And many, many, many have a custom that every week on Friday night, Shabbos Eve, they likewise bless their sons to be like Ephraim and Menashe. We hope that our children emulate the ways of Ephraim and Menashe. Now, there's only one other person that has this sort of blessing. Way back in chapter 12 of Genesis, when Abram, then he was called Abram, God tells him, go to the land of Canaan. And he tells him in verse 3, Va'avarcha mevarachach, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And then he says, V'nivrechu b'cha, and they will become blessed via you, all the families of the land. You will be the model, the prototype of blessing. When someone wants to bless their child, they will say, be like Abraham. This is like the peak, the pinnacle, the apotheosis, the acme of blessing. That all other people you'll be so blessed that everyone else will say, I want my kids to be like you. So I'll bless them to be like Abraham. That was a blessing given to Abraham. And now Jacob is assigning this blessing, which is the blessing of all blessings, the peak blessing, that you will be so blessed that everyone will bless their children to be like you. The blessing to end all blessings is given to Abraham by God. And now Jacob is giving it to Ephraim and Menashe. Now, this really raises a very interesting question. This event happened, 3,500 years ago? Joseph brought his sons to Jacob before he died. Jacob died 193 years before the Exodus. It's a long time ago. Until today, and in every Jewish home, there's hundreds of thousands of homes where parents will place their hands on their sons and say, be like Ephraim and Menashe. Why? Because of verse 20 of chapter 49. Jacob gave them the blessing that everyone else will give their children this blessing. There's something about these two lads that we want to perpetuate in our children. They're the prototypes of all blessings. We want our children to emulate them. When we bless our children today, 2025, we specifically bless them to be like Ephraim and Menashe. Not like Judah and Joseph, not like Benjamin and Levi, not even like Isaac or Jacob. These are the examples. What message are we trying to convey to our sons? There's something about these two boys, these two lads, that Jacob is cementing for perpetuity. This is what parents tell their sons. These are the examples that we all aspire to. No matter what you are, no matter where you are, no matter how you are, no matter what situation you are, you tell your kids, look at these two boys. What's so special about them? We don't think that they were necessarily greater than Judah, than Benjamin, than Yisachar and Zvulun, than Jacob, certainly not. But there's something very special about these two boys in particular that make them the example, the prototype of what we want our kids to aspire to. What is the message of Ephraim and Menashe? That was sort of the question that my friend came and asked me. And I thought of an answer, and I think it's true. And I'm going to share it with you right now. Before any blessings were conveyed, Jacob is old, he's sick, and he has 3 visitors. Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, his favorite son, he shows up with 2 boys in tow, Ephraim and Menashe. And in verse 5, Jacob makes an astonishing declaration. This is before any blessings. And he tells Joseph, your 2 boys who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I arrived, they're mine. Lihem, they're mine. And he makes a statement, Ephraim and Menashe, these 2 boys, Ephraim and Menashe, Keruven and Shimon, they're exactly like Reuven and Shimon. Joseph's 2 sons in verse 5 were added to a very rarefied fraternity. They're part of the tribes. Now, to us, we already are familiar with that. This is old news. It's 3,500-year-old news. But we cannot underestimate the significance of this development. Our nation is built in stages. The foundations, the roots, that's the forefathers. That's the patriarchs. That's the 3 people upon which God assigned his name to. When we start our prayers, we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. We say that about no one else. Not God of Moshe, not God of Aaron, not God of David. These are the 3 people who are the foundations, who exhibited monotheism, who demonstrated, who manifested monotheism, who taught the world about God. These are the fathers. These are the only 3 people that we say God of that person's name. In fact, the Talmud tells us David wanted people to say God of David, and God said, no, you're not on that level. You're not worthy to be one of the forefathers. That's the first stage of this wonderful edifice. And the next stage is building out the tribes. These are the 12 tribes. Not as great as the forefathers, but the nation must have 12 tribes. And we learn that in heaven, there are 12 gateways to heaven. Because there's 12 different ways to forge a relationship with the Almighty. And thus, our nation must have 12 tribes, because there must be one group for every facet of divine service. And that's why we have the 12 tribes. And this was all well known in Jacob's lifetime. You remember when he put stones around his head? Because he went to sleep on Mount Moriah. How many stones did he put? The Midrash says he put 12 stones. Because that was a form of a prayer. Give me the 12 tribes. Abraham didn't have 12 tribes. Isaac was not the father of 12 tribes. And Jacob was hoping that he would be the one. Now, it seems like it wasn't just Jacob and Abraham and Isaac who knew this. Jacob's wives knew this as well. So after Jacob had 10 sons, Leah became pregnant. And she reasoned with herself, if I have another son, then that will bring the tally up to 11. And there's only one son left. And then if Rachel will have that one son, she'll only end up with 1. 10 of them are already accounted for. If I have the 11th son, well, Rachel can have no more than 1, which would mean that Rachel would have fewer sons than the maidservants. So she prayed, and the child in utero, Rashi tells us, it was converted to a female. There has to be 12 tribes, and there's only 12 tribes. And even though Ephraim and Menashe are added, in every instance of tribal manifestations, there's only 12. So if the land of Israel is divided up into 12, Levi is withdrawn. If the enumeration of the nation, it's only 12, Levi is not counted. He's separated. On the breastplate of the high priest, well, then Joseph is just one. When Moshe blesses the nation at the end of the Torah, he excludes Shimon. There's always 12. There can never be 13, never be 11. That's the building blocks of the people, of the nation. 3 and then 12. And once this stage is over, the roles have been filled, it's too late. If I want to become the head of a new tribe, it's too late. That part has been done. That realm, that dimension, that aspect of the nation has already been built. Jacob meets 2 boys, and he's assessing them, and he's determining that these 2 are like Reuven and Shimon. We have 2 more tribes here. There's something extraordinary about these 2 lads that, contrary to all expectations, in a surprise that confounds everyone, 2 of Joseph's sons, they're joining this cohort. How does such a thing happen that there's only 12 tribes? You have the forefathers and then the tribes. And Jacob seems to be like he's the father of all the tribes, but now Joseph seems to bring boys that are on that level. There's a glitch in the matrix. Jacob is supposed to be the father of the tribes, yet he meets these 2 boys. They're tribes. They're like Reuven and Shimon. They belatedly become tribes on their own. Ephraim and Menashe, like Reuven and Shimon. Now, this does not mean that they were elevated because of nepotism or favoritism. These 2 people, Jacob's looking at them prophetically, and he's saying these are like Reuven and Shimon. They must be tribes. How did that happen? That is what Jacob set out to investigate. There's something unexpected here. There's unexpected greatness found in these 2 boys. And it's not just that they're the next generation. If we were to imagine that any of Jacob's grandchildren would end up as tribes, and we had to place bets, everyone would bet on other candidates than Ephraim and Menashe. The deck was heavily stacked against them. They were far, far away from anything that would encourage them to achieve the degree of transformative greatness needed to be part of this group. They're in the spiritual quagmire of Egypt, far, far, far from the conditions, the ideal conditions needed to raise greatness. There's something very surprising here. Against all odds, 2 exquisite roses burst forth amidst the thorns. How did this happen? How did 2 boys raised and born in the spiritual cesspool of Egypt, how did they become shiftei cut tribes of God? How did Ephraim and Menashe, who grew up in an alien environment, far away from the Jewish family, far away from the Jewish values, far away from the beacons of Torah, of monotheism, far away from Isaac, far away from the Holy Land, how did they become tribes of God? How did they become like Ephraim and Menashe became like Reuven and Shimon? How did they circumvent the convention that says that Jacob is the father of the tribes? How did these 2 flowers blossom in the desert? Once Jacob sees something so unexpected, he assigns it and he affixes it. He says, I want every Jewish family to learn this. Jacob gives a blessing to Ephraim and Menashe. You are prototypes for a value, for a lesson that every family must learn. Every parent must teach their child. You bless your child. In 2025, you say, go back to these 2 young boys. Because there's something extraordinary about them. They achieved greatness that they had no business achieving. They had no business being tribes. But against all expectations, they did it. That is a story that every child must hear. Every child must know that there's the possibility of achieving things that are just not in the cards. They're not expected. And when you bless your sons, your children, you tell them that there were once two boys who were in Egypt, and Ephraim and Menashe became like Reuven and Shimon. Learn this lesson. Drill it into your head. Don't believe when they tell you you can't do it. Don't limit yourself. You too can achieve things that are not maybe part of the plan. Even if it's not in the cards, even if it defies all the convention, even if it's not slated to be like that, even if it violates all the rules, it doesn't matter. They did it. Why can't you? There's an amazing lesson here that we can learn from these two boys. Even if the whole world tells you you're not a candidate for something very special, there's a level of greatness that's just not accessible to you. Sorry, you're not included. You're not in a position to achieve this level of greatness. No one's going to bet on you. The whole world, in fact, will bet against you. Even so, Ephraim and Menashe teach us that this absolutely unexpected greatness can still be achieved. And every Friday night, if you have the great privilege to bless your boys, this is the message Jacob tells us. Jacob blesses these two boys. Convey this message. Don't believe the naysayers and the prognosticators and the analysts. There is a path of unexpected greatness that was blazed by two boys in Egypt. And we can follow their example, and you can follow their example. This is the concept that we learn from Ephraim and Menashe. But let's get into the mechanisms. How indeed did they do it? Their destiny was to be grandchildren of Jacob, sons of Joseph, not tribes. They overcame their destiny. How do you do that? How did they do it? What is the means by which someone can achieve what they're not really cut out for, what they're not really destined to achieve, what no one expects them to achieve? Jacob himself pinpoints the secret to unexpected greatness. These boys were born where? In Egypt. To whom? To the viceroy of Egypt. They're living amongst Egyptian royalty. Everyone's an idolater. Everyone's a pagan around them. And where's Jacob? Jacob's their grandfather after all. But Jacob's far, far away. We would all bet against them because they're not growing up in an environment that is conducive to achieve this greatness. And Jacob says, no, we got it all wrong. It wasn't despite the circumstances of their upbringing that allowed them to achieve greatness. It was precisely because of their disadvantaged upbringing. What does Jacob tell Joseph? Your two boys who were born to you in the land of Egypt, Ad Boi Elecha Mitzrayim, until I came. Jacob points and says, these boys were born before I arrived. That is germane to the continuation of the verse. They're mine. Ephraim and Menashe like Reuven and Shimon. Why were Ephraim and Menashe like Reuven and Shimon? Because, not despite, because of their disadvantaged upbringing. This is an idea we see many places. A lot of people think that because they weren't raised in a spiritually wholesome environment, there's greatness that they just cannot possibly achieve. Jacob is saying the reason why these two boys became like Reuven and Shimon, it's because they grew up in Egypt. before Jacob arrived. There was no one there. And that actually created the conditions, counterintuitively, for them to become like Reuven and Shimon, for them to violate all the conventions. I mentioned this many times on the podcast. I'll say it again because it's very important. The Talmud says in the book of Brachos on page 34b, you know what I'm going to say? You know it. I'm going to say it. I'll say it again. The place, the spiritual place, where the penitents stand, even those who are pristinely righteous cannot stand. Meaning the spiritual level of someone who was distant from God and was a returnee, returned to God, became a Baal Tshuva, in the words of the Talmud. A penitent. The place where they are in proximity to God, someone who never sinned a day in their life, cannot get anywhere near that. In the words of the Rambam, when he discusses this Talmud, he says, their level is higher. So if someone grows up far, far away from Jacob, far, far away from Torah, they're actually capable of achieving heights that they could not have achieved if they grew up pristinely righteous. Flawless, in a flawless environment. That's what Jacob is saying here. We thought, everyone may think that, well, these boys are just not candidates to achieve superstardom. Because they're growing up in Egypt, far away from Jacob. But now it's the opposite. It's because they were far away from Jacob, because they had this very disadvantaged upbringing, that's what allowed them to become like Reuven and Shimon. Once I arrived, Joseph has more sons. Sorry, they're not able to achieve that level. They grew up in too cushy of an environment. They can never achieve that transformative greatness. Now, I imagine part of this is Joseph understood the enormous challenge that he would have. Joseph, one of the greatest people of all time, he has these two boys. And he understood the unique challenges that he will have raising these boys without Jacob in this very alien environment. And he knew that if he was going to pull this off, he would have to defy all expectations. And we imagine that he invested Herculean efforts to make sure that they were raised properly. But the net result of these boys being raised in the way, in the place, in the location, the time that they were raised in, the result is that they became greater than they would have otherwise. This is the principle of Ephraim and Menashe. They became tribes because they were built in the wasteland, in the desert, without any support, without any infrastructure, without the protective umbrella of Jacob and co. They ascended over their siblings, who were born subsequently, precisely because they were forged under fire, amidst the storm. The reason why they were selected is because they were raised before Jacob arrived. Had they been raised after Jacob arrived, they would not have been deserving of this promotion. So I think for one, this whole concept is very encouraging. That someone who no one expects could achieve greatness could have something unexpected. And I think it's also a valuable lesson. The amount of work that it took to raise Ephraim and Menashe was much more work than to raise them in a very wholesome environment. And many of us may bristle at hard work. But it pays. Specifically because of the magnitude of the challenge of raising them in this very harsh environment. And the amount of effort and determination and perseverance that it would require. That's precisely why they flourished and became what they became. Now, none of us are going to be tribes. And neither will our children. But nevertheless, Jacob tells us it's important to spotlight Ephraim and Menashe. They show us of the idea of this convention of achieving undeserving, unexpected greatness. And I was thinking to maybe give a little bit of an example of this idea that maybe is relevant to us. There are two teachings in the Talmud, in the book of Nida, one on page 16 and one on page 70 of the same book, that seem to be incompatible with each other. On page 16b of the book of Talmud, called the book of Nida, it talks about what happens before a child is conceived. What happens in heaven? What are the decisions made about a child before they're even a zygot? Talmud says that the angel picks up the biological matter soon to be a zygot and asks a series of questions to God. What's going to be with this soon to be human? Will they be strong or weak, wise or foolish, wealthy or poor? And all that is determined. What's undetermined, if they're righteous or wicked, that's not determined. But if they're strong or weak, rich or poor, wise or foolish, that is all determined. It's baked in stone. It's unchangeable, apparently. That's on page 16b in the book of Talmud of Nida. But I happen to have seen page 70b. And then the Talmud says, well, what if you're foolish, but you want to become wise? What do? And it lays out a roadmap. What if you're weak and want to become strong? It gives you a roadmap. What if you're poor and want to be rich? It gives you precise instructions for what you need to do. I always like to joke. The Talmud contains precise step-by-step instructions for how to become rich. But it places in the book of Nida, page 70b, which is only 3 pages before the end of the whole Talmud. So if you start reading the book, the Talmud from the beginning, you have to go 2,708 pages before you find the answer. So it does have a get rich quick instructions. Well, it's not quick, but get rich guaranteed. But most people will give up after 100 pages. I haven't found it. So how could it be that it's predetermined? The Talmud says on page 16b, it's predetermined if you'll be rich or poor. And then the Talmud says, well, if you're poor but you want to become rich, there's a way to do it. This is the same idea that Ephraim and Menashe embody. And this is the message that we tell our sons. You may have a destiny. Destiny says you're poor. Destiny says you're weak, you're feeble, you're foolish. And you know what? You're no way. It's not going to happen. You're not going to become a tribe. That's the destiny. Ephraim and Menashe say, so what? We could override that. We could violate that. We could supersede that. There's a path. And yes, the path will require a lot of hard work, determination, dogged perseverance, grit and persistence and insistence, and lots of prayer, as the Talmud tells us. But to me, this is a very powerful lesson, and one that Jacob says, teach your children. You are limited, and you are capped, and there is a ceiling, and it seems to be like concrete restraints on what you can accomplish. But Ephraim and Menashe show us that can be overcome. And we tell our children, be like Ephraim and Menashe. Yes, there are limitations. Yes, before you were born, it was determined you're not going to have this, you're not going to have that, you're not going to have that. So what? With enough hard work, with enough prayer, with enough determination, with enough absolute perseverance and grit. Not easy, but doable. And in fact, that's what we ought to try to do, to achieve greatness that is completely unexpected. No one, absolutely no one would have said, it's going to be the 2 extra candidates to be tribes. Ephraim and Menashe, natives of the land of Egypt, no one would have said that. So what? Let's do it nonetheless. And that's a message that's so important. We must tell our children and bless our children with this example. An idea on the Parsha. Let's get to this week's dilemma. Conundrum. Should we call it a conundrum? Conundrum. A dilemma. This is a dilemma that every teacher must face. You have a class and you're a teacher, and there are kids of mixed abilities. Some are very sharp and some are a little dull. And everyone's different speed of comprehension. Everyone's got different faculties. How do you teach? How do you tailor your message? Do you cater to the gifted? Try to enhance the learning of the gifted? And maybe allow the slower, less gifted ones to maybe fall through the cracks? Or maybe you should target the lower half and not optimize for the gifted. What a dilemma. To reinforce the strong ones or to boost the weaker ones. Now you may say, well, I'm not a teacher. Well, maybe a parent has the same question. Suppose you have two children. One's a star. They're bright and they're precocious and gifted in every way. Very bright future ahead of them, clearly. And one of them is struggling. All sorts of challenges and difficulties that are impeding their growth, their ability to succeed. And suppose you can only focus on one of them. Suppose. What do you prioritize? Do you try to supercharge the precocious one? To give them the best chance to catapult themselves to the absolute stratosphere? Or do you help the struggling one not fall behind their peers? And maybe this question can even be within ourselves. We have some excellent characteristics, and we got some weaker. We've got strengths and weaknesses. We have skills and abilities and qualities and shortcomings and flaws. Do we try to boost our strengths, make them like absolute powerhouses, juggernauts? Or do we maybe try to fix our flaws? They'll never become, something absolutely outstanding, but at least we'll create we'll make them okay. We'll make them good enough. It's a dilemma. It's a pedagogical dilemma. It's a parenting dilemma. It's the question of triage. What do you prioritize? We have Ephraim and Menashe. And they come to Jacob. And Joseph takes Menashe, the firstborn, in his left side, and Ephraim, the younger one, in his right side. And Jacob does the switcheroo. He crisscrosses his hand. He places the dominant hand on Ephraim and the weaker, the left hand on Menashe. And he justifies his behavior by saying, I know this one's older. Menashe's older. But so what? The younger one will become so much greater than the older one. So let me give him my right hand. I'm going to take my right dominant hand and place it on Ephraim because Ephraim is destined for greatness. Now, I imagine that argument could have been used to explain why he's going to place the right hand on Menashe. Because Menashe, he needs a boost. He's not as great as Ephraim. And therefore, I should help him to achieve parity, equality, equity, by placing my right hand on Menashe. But no. Jacob has only one dominant hand and one left hand, the weaker hand. He has one dominant blessing, and he chooses to supercharge the more gifted, the more promising one, in lieu of trying to balance things out, of creating equality by lifting the weaker one to make it more of a parity. So I think it's a bit counterintuitive. I think all of us would have voted on the other side. You got to help the kids not to fall through the cracks. But it's interesting. Jacob also, he gives us the logic to it. Why would it be more important to take that one child and make sure that the gifted child, and make sure they achieve superstardom, even if that means to maybe neglect to one degree or another the weaker child? My grandfather used to always say, Jacob is always in our Parsha focusing on individuals. If you ever have the great privilege of reading this week's Parsha with Rashi, you'll notice many, many, many times when Jacob looks at one of his tribes and he gives them a blessing that's going to apply to that tribe forever, he focuses not on the tribe at large, but individuals in the tribe. So, for example, 48:8, when Jacob sees the two boys, he says, "Who are these?" Now, we read it and we say, well, Jacob, maybe he doesn't know who they are. He's getting old, dementia. That's not what Rashi says. Rashi says that when Jacob saw these two, he looked at them prophetically and his prophecy went away. Because there are wicked descendants, Yeravam and Achav, who are descendants of Ephraim, and Yehu, who is a descendant of Menashe. So when he's looking at a tribe, he sees the individual, and the individual kind of is the identity of the whole tribe. Now, when he places his right hand upon Ephraim and the left hand upon Menashe, well, Ephraim's greater. He's superior. Why is Ephraim superior? So again, Rashi says, because Ephraim's greatest descendant is Joshua. And Joshua is greater than Menashe's greatest descendant, namely Gidon. And if you look at the blessings of the other tribes, he's focusing on the standouts. When he talks about Judah, it's about David. When he's blessing Dan, it's about Shimshon. It's blessing Benjamin, it's about Saul. There's an emphasis on the individuals. And perhaps we can say that this is an argument in favor of the great man theory of history, that one individual can change the whole world. If that's your focus, as a pedagogue, as a teacher, as Jacob, you're looking to see who is a candidate to be that one star. That I want to empower, give all the tools that they can have to achieve something which will absolutely change the whole world. We could think of a secular example of this. Benjamin Franklin, everyone's favorite founding father. This guy is like unbelievable. He founds effectively the republic and he negotiates peace for this republic, and he also invents the bifocals and lightning rods and all kinds of interesting things and founds a world-class university. How many different individual people did the work of one Benjamin Franklin? That's a secular example. We talk about Abraham. Abraham was one man who changed the whole world. Moshe, as another example. One man brings the Torah from the heavens on high, brings it down here. Messiah, we're waiting for Messiah. One person that will change the entire world to get the whole world to believe in God. 8 billion people, everyone is going to believe in God. That's what we're waiting for. We believe one person can change the world. There is a legitimate pedagogical approach that argues if you have someone that is potentially the next one person change everything, you got to invest everything. All your chips into the table, all your eggs in one basket. You go all in. You shoot for the stars with the best candidate for superstardom. Now, I know many will argue the opposite. It's a dilemma. This is not something which is easily solved. And there are legitimate arguments for the opposite perspective. I actually had a nice chat this past weekend, with a Rabbi Miller from the United Kingdom, who is the head of a very famous seminary in a place called Gateshead. It's a very famous Jewish seminary in England, and he told me, he says, by us, the teachers aim to try to tailor their lectures and their teachings to the absolute top of the class, not to the bottom. And I like that, because I know there are other institutions that choose the opposite. Make sure no child left behind. I like that he said, no, we aim for the top. Why? Because we see a philosophy here, a perspective of Jacob, and that is, we're looking for individuals. Individuals. Joshua, that one person, the descendant of Ephraim, that like encapsulates the whole tribe. The whole tribe is just one person. And that's the reason why Ephraim is greater than Menashe. Because Joshua is greater than Gideon. To me, it's a novel idea. I think it's a bit controversial. That's okay. It's a dilemma, something to chew on, to consider, to wrestle with, a conundrum to think about. That's what we're trying to do here. Something just to maybe facilitate discussion. But that's that. It's a wrap. The book of Genesis in the books. Year 9 of the Parsha Podcast. I'm in the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. TorchZoom.com. Tuesday evenings. At what time? Oh, at 8 p.m. Central. TorchZoom.com. Join us if you're interested. Please, we're going to continue going into the book of Exodus with the help of the Almighty. Thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day. A wonderful rest of your week. A terrific, sensational, elevating, memorable Shabbos upcoming. And please, God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll gather together again next week for another installment of the Parsha Podcast. My email address is rabbi@gmail.com.